Modern society has fed us the lie that pornography is harmless, free, private, and doesn't impact anyone else. It's been disguised as sexual empowerment. But there's a reason the phrase "porn is free because you pay with your soul" exists. Because we pay a heavy toll via our well-being, mental health, moral integrity, mental focus, relationships, and physical health. Yet the argument stays the same. It's normal, everyone watches it. But when you look at pornography through psychology, neuroscience, behavioral conditioning, and trauma research, this reasoning starts to fall apart. Understanding what pornography negatively does to the brain is integral to a wider societal return to a morality that encourages genuine human flourishing and respects and reveres sex as a sacred act, which in its most natural sense exists for the creation of new life, with a secondary purpose of bonding two lovers. Children as young as 7 are now stumbling across explicit sexual content online, according to the British Board of Film Classification, and we really can't ignore this dark issue any longer. Just because something proves to be popular does not mean it belongs in our culture. I'm Delphine and this is my Viewpoint. In the digital world, attention isn't neutral. Attention is currency. Every click, every view, every return visit trains algorithms and generates revenue. Even if you never pay for pornography, your attention still sustains the industry. Psychologically, this matters because it breaks the illusion that porn is just a private habit. Pornography exists at the scale it does because millions of private choices reinforce it every day. When behavior is repeated at scale, it becomes structural, not personal. Now let's talk about the brain. Pornography directly targets the brain's dopamine reward system, the same system involved in gambling and addiction. Dopamine isn't about pleasure, it's about reinforcement. It teaches the brain what to repeat. Sexual novelty produces especially strong dopamine spikes. Pornography offers endless novelty, new bodies, new scenarios, new extremes, with no effort, no rejection, and no real-world risk. Over time, the brain learns something very specific. This is an easy reward. That's why many people don't watch porn because they want to. They watch it because their brain expects it, even when they feel conflicted and even when they want to stop. That's not a character flaw, it's conditioning. Popular neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman has raised concerns about masturbation and pornography, about how it negatively affects healthy sexual interactions and communication skills, saying, "Masturbation and pornography are potently tapping into the dopamine system and can undermine the very processes of finding a mate, dating, communication, and sexual interaction. In the absence of a real partner of a real sexual partner, there's an open loop of neurochemicals, including oxytocin and prolactin. The dopamine goes up, then peaks and crashes below baseline, putting people into an amotivated state. As with any conditioned behavior, tolerance builds. What once felt stimulating becomes familiar. The brain adapts by seeking novelty, intensity, or escalation. This isn't because people are broken, it's because the brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, chase efficient rewards. But here's where things get very uncomfortable. When a behavior is both rewarding and ethically troubling, the mind doesn't usually confront the conflict. It protects the behavior. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning. We don't ask certain questions, not because we don't care, but because caring would threaten access to something our brain has learned to rely on. So questions like, was this person coerced? Was this filmed legally? Was this person underage? Those questions don't get answered. They get avoided, not consciously, but automatically. The brain chooses comfort over confrontation. This is how ordinary people participate in harmful systems without feeling cruel. The avoidance itself becomes invisible. This kind of psychological distancing isn't new. Speaking at the recent March for Life in Washington, D.C., US Vice President J.D. Vance spoke about a snippet of history he'd read about in an archaeological journal. Archaeologists excavating sites in the ancient world believed to be brothels have found that close to each of these locations, they usually find nearby the remains of dead infants, suggesting that even in the ancient world, sexual systems built on exploitation had ways of disposing of any consequences that threatened their operation. The psychological pattern is familiar. When a system depends on pleasure, power, and secrecy, the human cost doesn't disappear. It gets hidden. It gets managed. It gets pushed out of sight so the system can continue without interruption. The important point isn't ancient history, it's the mechanism. When desire is separated from responsibility, when gratification is disconnected from consequences, harm doesn't stop occurring, it just stops being seen. And once harm is out of view, the mind finds it much easier not to question at all. This pattern isn't unique to pornography. We see it in fast fashion, exploitative labor, and environmental damage. Anywhere pleasure or convenience is built on distance from harm. Porn just happens to be one of the most psychologically intimate versions of this dynamic. When you step outside the fantasy frame, trauma psychology fills in the blanks. Survivors of sex trafficking report being coerced into pornography at extremely high rates. Many describe repeated sexual violence filmed, distributed, and monetized with no ability to withdraw consent. This kind of prolonged, inescapable abuse often leads to complex PTSD, trauma that doesn't come from a single event, but from being trapped in a system where escape isn't possible. And this isn't limited to obscure corners of the internet. A significant amount of this content ends up on mainstream platforms. Once something is uploaded, the trauma doesn't stop. It's replayed again and again for profit. Consent becomes irrelevant the moment distribution begins. There's another part of this that people rarely talk about: pregnancy. In exploitative environments, pregnancy is a threat to control, concealment, and profit. That's why studies of trafficking survivors show extremely high rates of forced abortion, often multiple times. From a psychological standpoint, this isn't about choice, it's about control. In these contexts, abortion functions as a mechanism to erase evidence of abuse and keep the system running smoothly. Social psychology helps explain why this continues. When harm is spread across many layers, producers, platforms, advertisers, and consumers, responsibility dissolves. This is called diffusion of responsibility. Everyone plays a role, but no one feels accountable. Consumers sit at the end of the chain, protected by the belief that their behavior is private, minor, and insignificant. But systems don't run on intention, they run on participation. This conversation isn't only about people on screen. Repeated pornography use has been associated with increased objectification, reduced empathy, narrowed sexual arousal patterns, avoidance-based coping, and difficulty experiencing real intimacy. Not because people become bad per se, but because their brain adapts to what it repeatedly consumes. Over time, a real connection can start to feel slower, riskier, and more demanding than curated fantasy. Emotional vulnerability gets replaced with control. Presence gets replaced with novelty. These changes don't happen overnight, they happen quietly through repetition. And this is where the conversation usually goes wrong. Shame does not break compulsive behavior, awareness does. People don't change because they're attacked, they change when automatic behavior becomes a conscious choice. Understanding how porn trains the brain and what it sustains restores agency. Porn thrives on the belief that it is harmless. Psychology tells a different story, one about conditioning, avoidance, trauma, and systems that depend on our silence and acceptance of pornography as simply part of the culture. Once you see that, the question is truly about whether your private habits align with your values. And that's not just a moral question. It's a psychological one that has shown time and time again that it has mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical consequences.